Hey guys. So I could not find a version of the Black Cat online that I liked, so I'm gonna read it to you. Of course, as always, you're welcome to just read it yourself. You don't have to listen to me. Um, but if you'd rather, here goes. But before I start, the Black Cat is that story that I explained to you earlier this year. That was kind of weird, kind of creepy, but absolutely one of my favorite Poe stories. Um, you know, Poe, 1800s, odd guy, difficult language. We just know. I mean, that's his writing, and that's the way it is. So, um, I turned on my YouTube channel, underneath this video, the option to like make comments, and so please, as you watch it, ask questions, or email me if you don't know what it's saying or what it's meaning. And I hate recording myself. Okay, so The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. It's kind of long, so here we go. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Okay, so if we were in class right now, I'd probably ask you, and I'm going to try not to stop a million times, but I'd probably ask you, so what's he saying here? He's going to tell us a story, but he doesn't expect us to believe it, right? Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. Okay, like if we were annotating, right, like underline that. Important thing, tomorrow I die. Any guesses of why or how, or I mean, like, how does he know he's going to die the next day? Where do you think he is as he's telling us this story? And why is he telling us this story? He says to unburden his soul. So what do you think that means? My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe. Nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. So I would tell you guys that as he tells us this story, as he's about to start this story, he's telling us that they just happened, right? Nothing weird, nothing caused them to happen. He's telling us this, but as we read it, you'll see that he doesn't believe that. This is like classic example of a non-reliable narrator. We can't trust this dude. He's a Poe character, right? You probably already know he's crazy. We can't trust him. He's telling us one thing, but I think that if we read between the lines and make inferences, we will see something totally different. Okay? From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity in my disposition. My tenderness of heart was ever so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. He was bullied. That's a bad sign. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy than feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection of a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly to be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I know some of you out there agree with that. Some of you out there are like me and serious animal lovers. And so you're like, yeah, we get this guy. He loves his dog. Don't we all? I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my particularity for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter, the cat, was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious at an astonishing degree. In speaking of its intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the little ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. So this, obviously, guys, is where we can't trust her, right? I mean, or trust him. Are you surprised that the main character in this, the pet he's going to talk about is a large, purely black cat? Well, he's not purely black, but black cat. We know that black cats kind of have this, that we have an idea that they are bad luck. Just last night I was walking and a black cat crossed my path and I had to quickly spit over my shoulder. So, yeah, it makes sense that Poe would choose this as kind of the animal that he focuses on. And, he brings up the superstition that they're actually witches in disguise. A little foreshadowing, right? Pluto, this was the cat's name. There's meaning in the name. See if you can figure it out, okay? Was my favorite pet. And playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me whenever I went about the house. It was even with great difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. How perfect is this as my cat's laying in my lap? Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend impotence. I need to rewind. I'm going to start this paragraph over again. I got distracted by Iceman. Okay. Pluto was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me whenever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. So it's a cat that follows him around, right? Like, that's pretty normal. If a cat likes you, he's going to kind of wrap itself around your feet at all times. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend impotence, had I blush to confess it, experienced a radical altercation for the worse. Okay, guys, altercation, right? A change. His character, his attitude, his state of mind became worse, okay? I grew day by day more moody and more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intimate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still restrained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits and the monkey, even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length, even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. Okay, so a couple of things. He just nonchalantly mentions that in this change of character, he starts to mistreat his wife, right? A little violent with her, even. The animals, cruel to them, no big deal, right? He's just going through a little change. At first, he does not do that to Pluto, but before too long, we find that even he suffers the effects of this character's change. For what disease is like alcohol? So there we go. We have a pretty good idea of why he says he is going through this crazy change. One night, upon returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts around town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin nurtured, gin as an alcohol, right? Gin nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut out one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen this atrocity. What do you do to the cat, guys? What do you do? Cut his eye out, right? Iceman, what do you think about that? He cut his eye out. Okay? When reason returned in the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauchery, I experienced a sentiment of half horror, half remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. So, it bugged him a little bit at first. He felt a little bit guilty, but before too long, he was able to get over it. And he drinks more, okay? In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of his lost eye presented in its true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike of the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then, as if to my final, irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness, which is all, that word's all capitalized, right? One of the questions you're going to see after this is he chooses to capitalize certain words in this story. Why does he choose those words? Like, why are they important? Of this spirit, philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure than my soul lives that I am the perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. This is a really good statement, guys. I want you to listen to this and think about whether or not you agree with this, okay? So once again, let me read that sentence. I read it wrong anyways. It says, yet I am not more sure than my soul lives that I am that perverseness, that I am more sure that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. One of the invisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a stupid action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? So guys, think about that. Have you ever done something that maybe, and not cut a cat's eyeball out, but just anything that maybe you should not have done, just if you can get away with it, whether it's something like, I don't know, cheating on something, or I don't know. I know you guys have not ever cut a cat's eye out. Just, done something that maybe you knew in your heart of hearts, told a fib, wasn't exactly right, but you did it anyways, okay? And he's saying that's like a very natural thing for a man, is to do that. Do bad things just because, no real reason. Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, break the law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffering brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it in the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse of my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. Most merciful and most terrible God. I feel like that was also a sentence that Weasel used in Night. You guys remember that? But if you're reading along with me, the story, you'll notice at this part there's lots of dashes used in Poe's writing, and he's doing that to kind of show the mindset of this main character. obviously he's starting to lose it more and more, and the more you see in the writing Poe jumping around and telling the story, and the guy telling the story, the more you see that he's kind of starting to lose it. He's all over the place. So he hangs this cat, right? And he says he does it for, he's crying, and he does it because the cat loved him, and he does it because he knows he shouldn't be doing it. So, this is the point where I'm like, alcoholism is a very sad, very scary disease. But do you guys think that it's alcoholism, or do you think it's more? What do you think is causing kind of this state of mind? On the night of the day on which the most cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of a fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity. So he's saying, like, yeah, these two things, they don't have anything to do with each other, when obviously we know that he very much does think they have to do with each other, okay? But I'm detailing a chain of effects. Look at him, look at me. Isn't that sweet? But I'm detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to having been recently spread. About this wall, a dense crowd was collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with a very minute and eager attention. The words strange and singular and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. So guys, basically, right after he hangs this cat, right, he's asleep one night, his house catches on fire. He's able to get out, right? And he says, when they go back, there's just this basically one wall left standing untouched. And on that one wall is the outline of a cat hanging. So do you think that's just a weird coincidence, an accident? Or do you think it is the cat coming back for some revenge? Let's see. It seemed like there was something I wanted to say about that. I don't know. We'll keep going. It'll come to me. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remember, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, the garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by some one of whom the animal must have been cut down from the tree and thrown through the open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of the other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portrait that I saw. So he's saying what must have happened was that somebody cut down the cat from the tree, trying to wake him up, threw it through the open window. It got stuck and got crushed, and there's the outline. And I remembered what I was going to say earlier. Do you guys remember this year reading the story There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury? And after that atomic bomb goes off, like, there's just the silhouette is the word he uses of the people throwing the ball and the kid and whatnot. That's what I picture with this story as well. Is I picture those silhouettes, the silhouette of the cat hanging. Although I thus readily accounted for my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not less fail me to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed but not remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented, for another pet of the same species, as of somewhat similar appearance, from which to supply its place. Hi, Evie.
Hey.
One night, as I sat, half stupefied, in a den more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin. So basically sitting in a bar, guys. Or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had no sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and touched it with my hand.
What's that?
It was a black cat.
Mm-hmm.
It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of his breast. Okay, so he's sitting in a bar, drinking, and he looks up and he looks across, and what does he see sitting there in front of him? Black cat, right? Black cat that looks very, very, very similar to Pluto. Okay? There's one difference, though. The white on the chest. So what do you think he should do, guys? Should he just pack this cat up and take it home? Try having more pets, or does he just need to leave it? What do you think? Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. Are y'all surprised? I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evidenced disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite of my wife. Beck's in here. You can leave the door open. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame, and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterably loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence and from the breath of a pestilence. Pestilence is a word we talked about with the Mask of Red Death right before we were let out. Do you remember what it means? Do you remember? Sickness, right? Disease. So, he took the cat home. The cat seemed to like him a lot, but the more the cat liked him, that's cracks me up about cats. It seems like the more like you ignore a cat, the more they want to climb all over you, and that's what this cat kind of does to this guy. He's disgusted and loathes it. Surprise, surprise. He doesn't do anything to it at first, right? Because he still had this weird kind of feeling about Pluto. But finally, no surprise, he's starting to lose it again. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of his eyes. Sorry. Beckham, are you okay? Go wash your face off.
I did.
I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, just like Pluto, it had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I've already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. She still liked animals. He's changed. With my aversion to this cat, however, it was partial to me. For myself seemed to increase. Sorry, I was making sure my video hasn't stopped. It followed my footsteps, which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber to this matter to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I'm almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's jail cell, okay, right, we found out where he is. I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair of which I had spoken, and which constituted the sole visibility difference between the strange beast and the one I destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had originally been very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous, distinct outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this above all I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a ghastly thing of gallows, O mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and death. So this white mark on the cat, the new cat, right? Before it had no shape. It was just a blob. Now it is the shape of like a noose. Like, he hung Pluto, the first cat, and now this cat has the shape of that around his neck. Coincidence? And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in the image of my high God in such an insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. He's just describing like the cat laying on him, right? He's crazy. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. My moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and all mankind, while from the sudden frequent and unforgivable outburst of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself. My uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. Throughout the story, you've probably mentioned that he kind of explains these really, really odd, really, really, really bad things that he does by making them seem like no big deal at all. Just by mentioning, so I was kind of going crazy, so I still left the cat alone, but the cat was driving me crazy, so my wife had to suffer the blows, right? So I took it out on my poor wife. One day, she accompanied me upon the household errand into the cellar of an old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. So, when his first house burnt down and all of that, and then, the drinking and whatnot, he's lost basically everything, okay? We obviously at the end we can trace that back to the cat, perhaps even blame it on the cat, but we'll see. The cat followed me down the steep stairs and nearly throwing and headlong exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my mind, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Was arrested by the head of my wife. Not her hand, but her head. She tries to stop him from axing the cat. Okay. Goaded by the, it was hand. She tried to stop him. And she kind of grabbed hold of the axe. Sorry. Goaded by the inference into rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. Now it's in her head. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with the entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house either by day or by night without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another I resolved to dig a grave for it to the floor in the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well of the yard, about packing it into a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered to be a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. So, guys, side note, you've seen Poe do that before in a story. Last year in Miss Brown's class, you read the Cask of Amontillado, and in that story, he walls up someone alive. This one, she's obviously dead, but he's like, the best way I can figure out to hide this body is to take down some bricks, put my wife's body behind it, brick it back up, and nobody will ever know the difference. For a purpose as this cellar was well adapted, its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole thing up as before, so that no one ever direct as anything suspicious. Remember, guys, he's in his jail cell telling us this story, and, I know that we've talked about it, and you've noticed how he's telling it like it's no big deal. Like, this is what I did, and then I did this, and so I thought about different ways to hide my wife's body, but this was the best decision. Right, so that shows us something of his mental state. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited her body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which would not be distinguished from the old. And with this I very carefully went over to the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was all right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain. My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep and blissful sense of relief with the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. Slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. So the night, after he walls up his wife and has killed her, he says that the cat's gone. The cat must have been scared off by his violence, and for the first night in a long time, he actually can sleep well. The second and the third day passed, and still my tormentor come not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises of ever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt in my darkness deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted for his wife. But of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make a rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms on my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say it but once, by way of triumph, and to render doubtedly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight that have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By and by, gentlemen. This is a very well-constructed house." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together, and here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I had in my hand, upon the very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. So, guys, the police come to check his house again, and they're down in the cellar, and they're leaving like he's gotten away with it again. And what does he do but bang on the wall, right, almost showing out, kind of, where he had put his wife. "But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend." No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. By a cry, at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream. Utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in the agony, and the demons in the exult their damnation. Of my own thoughts, it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered upon the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless through extremity of terror and awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. The end. So, guys, basically here at the end, when he put his wife behind the wall, the cat had climbed in with her. And so when he knocked on the wall, I don't know if this is the best story for my 6-year-old to be listening to, but whatever. When he knocked on the wall, the cat screamed, and the police tore the wall down. The police found her body, and he gets taken in, and he's on death row. And so the story is told by him sitting in his jail cell, and he's going to be executed the next day, and it's him supposedly like clearing his conscience of all that happened. And even though he tells us at the beginning of the story that he thinks it happened just all accidentally, these events don't have one to do with the other. We see that, they do, and he thinks that as well. He's just a very unreliable narrator. We can't trust him to tell us the truth. Now, Poe wrote it in a way, and we're smart enough to make inferences and see what's really happening and how it really happened. But he doesn't come right out and tell us. Do you like it? It's a dark story, but y'all know I'm a cat person, so I like it because I like to think that the cat got revenge, right? the cat came back. So, I mean, do you think, let me ask you this. Do you think that there was ever even a second cat? Do you think that that night he went to the bar and saw that cat? Was there a cat there? Was there never a cat there and he just lost it even more? Or do you think that there was that second cat and the second cat was completely normal and did normal cat things? And he was so crazy that in his mind he pictured it to slowly kind of turn into this reincarnation of Pluto. Or do you think it was Pluto? Do you think Pluto got his revenge? He came back as the second cat and took revenge on the man for, I mean, obviously probably most of you think it was just a normal second cat, and his craziness made him see all of these things that turned him into Pluto. I like to think that it was from revenge myself, just because I'm like, go cat, go black cat, right? So a lot of different people like this story. A lot of people say, Poe wrote it in a way in which we can see his descent into madness through the writing, through the way he tells the story. Gets more and more kind of crazy as he talks. You can tell by the way it's written with all the dashes and the capital letters, and hopefully you read this along with me. You can kind of see the writing change, the way it looks change. Also, people say that with the story starting out of him, being halfway he liked animals, halfway normal, and then slowly descending, and then it all ending in the cellar is like his descent into madness as well. That's like representation and symbolism for all that good stuff. But this is a 41-minute video, so I'm going to stop it. And if you choose this one, you need to answer 4 questions of all of the ones provided. And if you have any questions on it, please, 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 please ask me. Okay? See you later.